Welcome, everyone. We are just overwhelmed by the response that this session has received, and we're just so happy to have you with us. It's obvious that you understand the important role your leadership will play in the success of this promising literacy initiative. I think it goes without saying that anything of any importance that happens at your school would never be optimized without your leadership. That's something that I consistently contend when I'm talking to legislators, policymakers. We have to attend to the needs of our school leaders because that's how we protect our investments and make good things happen for children. I believe you're here today also because you're looking for answers. You're looking for a way that you can bring better literacy skills to your students. You want all of your students, each and every child, to be successful, and you recognize the importance of effective literacy skills. And so that's why you're here today too. I want to say that your team from the Department of Public Instruction, and especially in the Office of Early Learning, they have worked very hard to put this session together for you. They reached out to us because they wanted to get this message to you. They know the important role that you play. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Ryan.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Prince, and thank you, Tracy, and of course the NCPAPA team. Thanks for your amazing collaboration, not only here in this particular session, but also for always being great partners for North Carolina educators. We certainly appreciate you and don't take that for granted. But I'm Amy Ryan. I'm the Office of Early Learning Director here at NCDPI, and I cannot express how amazingly overwhelmed I am with the response of the participants today, and also humbled and honored to be a part of the great things happening around North Carolina as far as early literacy. I want to be sure to point out, though, this does not happen in isolation because of one group or one individual. This has happened as a result of many forward thinkers and collaborators that are committed to children and educators. And so our colleagues in Mississippi have led the way, and we're certainly looking forward to learning more from Dr. Burk and her team and appreciate their time today. And then additionally, I want to also make sure that I recognize, much of the deserved credit also goes to the aligned focus and efforts of our North Carolina General Assembly with the recent updates and integration of science and reading into our Read to Achieve legislation, as well as the level of commitment and dedication from our Superintendent Truitt, and the State Board, as they are always willing to look at the continued improvement of early literacy in North Carolina. And so much appreciation to them for their continued efforts. But at this time, I am going to turn it over to Tanya Parrish. She is our Read to Achieve Section Chief, and she's going to introduce just a few of our early literacy, early learning rock stars that will be presenting today.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to everyone that has joined us today. As Amy said, we are just very excited and thrilled to be able to spend the next few moments with you, and we value your time. And I am just thrilled to be able to honor our to announce our wonderful team today. So you will have today joining us Mary Durfel, who is our early literacy consultant for the Piedmont Triad region. We also have with us today Casey Taylor, who is the early literacy consultant in the Southeast region, and then Kelly Bendheim, who is the early literacy consultant in the Northwest region. And today they are going to share lots of information with you along with Dr. Burke's team. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Durfel. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. So good afternoon. I'm Mary Durfel, as Tanya said, and I'm going to take you through just a very brief overview of what the science of reading is and what it is not. So let's consider how researcher and teacher Dr. Louisa Moats has described the science of reading. We're going to pick this quote apart just a little bit. Let's start with what Dr. Moats says the science of reading is not. The body of work referred to as the science of reading is not an ideology, a philosophy, that's very important, it's not a theory, a political agenda, one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a program of instruction that you can buy, and it's not a specific component of instruction that you can insert into your day. Let's look at the next slide, and I'm going to give you a moment to read this to yourself about what Dr. Moat says the science of reading is. So I'm going to pause here and let you read this quietly to yourself. Let's look at the next slide, and I have put in bold on the next slide the words or phrases that stand out to me when I read this quote. And as I go through this, think about for yourself, what are the words and phrases that stood out to you? So the science of reading is an emerging consensus from many related disciplines. So it's not just education, it's also cognitive science, neuroscience, psychology. So there are many fields involved in this body of research. It's based on thousands of studies, hundreds of millions of research dollars. And it's really all about how we learn to read, what goes wrong when you don't learn, and probably the most applicable to us, what kind of instruction is most likely to work the best for the most students. So we want to be both efficient and effective because we know that time is precious. And I want to look, if you'll go back, Kelly, I just want to use this analogy of a tree because I was an elementary school teacher, and I think this is a great way to help you remember when someone says, well, what is the science of reading? So just very briefly, you can see there, this is from the Professional Learning Community Emergent Literacy. It's from RAIL, one of their practice guides. And so you can see there's the tree, and you have your leaves and your fruit. You've got your trunk down into the roots. And then we know that those roots are anchored in the soil. And so I think of the science of reading like the soil. It is nourishing and growing and feeding those roots, right? So that's what we're anchored in. And those roots are then our foundational literacy skills that help us become decoders and fluent readers. So I can look at the page and I can read the words automatically and effortlessly. And then what is produced from that is reading comprehension. So that's an easy way that you can remember. The science of reading is that body of research. It's like that soil that the tree is anchored in. So settled research has shown that while language or learning to speak is natural to the human brain, learning to read is not. And this is an important point. Learning to read takes intentionality. Specifically, we can support the development of new pathways in the brain through instruction that lead to skilled reading. Let's go ahead to the next slide and look at this diagram of the brain together. This is my favorite slide. So this is a view of the left hemisphere of the brain. So the left hemisphere of your brain. For skilled reading to occur, processing systems in the brain have to communicate with one another through pathways. However, at birth, humans are not born with these pathways naturally in place. The pathways develop when we explicitly teach students to connect speech to print. So look carefully at the diagram, and I want you to notice where the visual word form area is on the slide. It's orange. You can see it's kind of back here on that left hemisphere. And then it's near the back part. And then I want you to notice where the pronunciation and articulation area of the brain is located. It's that purplish burgundy color. It's in the frontal lobe of the left hemisphere. So when we see a word or a letter, it is processed in the visual word form area near the back part of your brain's left hemisphere. So I see the letters C-A-T on the page. The pronunciation of that word or the sounds represented by those letters, C-A-T, that's actually housed here in the front part of my brain, in the frontal lobe. Reading instruction is what develops a pathway between those two areas, which results in reading. That pathway must be formed intentionally over time. And research has shown us that we build that pathway a very certain way. We explicitly teach phonemic awareness, phoneme, grapheme correspondences, decoding, and encoding. It's really amazing. It happens, I think it's like 420 milliseconds. You read a word and those pathways fire back and forth. So let's look at the next slide. Now that we have a basic understanding, and that was very basic, I'm not a neuroscientist, of what must occur in the brain for a person to become a skilled reader, let's consider the implications for education. So to understand how a student develops into a fluent reader who can comprehend text, I find it really helpful to look at 2 reading models aligned with the science of reading. These reading models should be used to inform instruction as well as assessment. First, let's look at the simple view of reading. It's on the top there. It's a formula introduced by Goff and Tunmer in 1986. And the simple view demonstrates that reading comprehension is a product of decoding and language comprehension, which are separate but both necessary skills. Weakness in either decoding or linguistic comprehension will reduce the ability of the student to reach the ultimate goal, which is reading or comprehending the text. The simple view is a multiplication problem, and that helps us to remember, at least it helps me remember when I look at it, that, that it's if either component, decoding or language comprehension is weak, language comprehension is weak, decoding is weak, comprehension will suffer. So for example, if my decoding is a 0 and my language comprehension is a 1, 0 times 1 is still 0. So reading comprehension has suffered. And it works vice versa. If language comprehension is a 0 and decoding is a 1, 1 times 0 is still 0. So both are important from the very beginning. The second reading model to consider actually expands the simple view, and it is Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, which she developed in 2001. Like the simple view, the rope breaks the skilled reading pieces down into language comprehension and word comprehension, but then it breaks both areas down even further into sub-skills that comprise each. The 3 strands of the word recognition portion weave together and lead to fluent and automatic word recognition. However, if even one of those strands is frayed or broken, if it's weak, word recognition is not as strong. Likewise, the language comprehension portion of the rope is made of strands that weave together to build increasingly strategic comprehension skills. But again, like a true rope, if one strand is frayed or broken, the integrity of the whole rope is compromised. So if one or more of these strands in the reading rope is broken, skilled reading is then compromised. That was a very brief, kind of fast and furious overview of the science of reading and a broad picture of the implications for the classroom. In conclusion, what I'd love for you to remember as a takeaway is that the science of reading is a large body of scientific research, which informs practitioners in selecting and implementing practices that will be most effective for the most students. Now I'd like to turn this presentation over to Dr. Kymyona Burk. Dr. Burk will be sharing with us a few lessons learned as she led the implementation of Mississippi's Literacy-Based Promotion Act. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Burk.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to just share a little bit about our deployment of our Literacy-Based Promotion Act here in Mississippi. And I did bring along today some colleagues who will be joining me a little bit after my presentation to discuss how this actually looks on the ground. All right, next slide. Well, you know, I'm sure you've heard so much about these reading wars, and it's great that North Carolina has just taken a stand to say that we support the science of reading. And we want to ensure that all of our students, you know, not just those who are in high-performing schools with high-performing teachers, but that all of our students, all of our teachers know what the science of reading is and that they will commit to best practices that will benefit all children. So as adults continue to engage in these reading wars, understand that our students are confused. You know, they want to know exactly what it is they need to do, and they will do it. Just the adults, we're here today because we want to be able to get it right and to ensure that we are, again, aligning our supports and services to best serve our students. Next slide. Okay, North Carolina, you are not alone. There are about 14 states, and then most recently Louisiana, those states that are in dark blue, that have all adopted some form of a comprehensive early literacy policy. And I'll go through what those components specifically are in a few slides. But these are the states in dark blue that have committed to making sure that the science of reading is being used in schools, and that teachers are trained, and that students are identified early, and that parents are also notified and have resources. And if you see the key, it kind of shows you the other states that have adopted some of those principles, and then of course states that have adopted minimal principles. But again, the governor of Louisiana just recently signed their comprehensive literacy law, and we are so excited at ExcelinEd to be able to support them in that effort. Next slide. Okay, this interconnected system from policy to practice. So our legislators have done some work, right, in North Carolina. They passed this law. They've enhanced, Read to Achieve. They have done all of these things, put these things in place, and they put these things in writing. And I always say, putting it in writing and passing the policy, that's one step, and that is a major first step. But where the rubber meets the road, where policy meets practice, is going to be in your buildings, at your schools, as school leaders, the ways in which you ensure that your teachers are being trained and that your teachers are being supported in implementing these best practices in the building. And then, of course, with your Department of Public Instruction, ways in which they will support you on the ground in ensuring that this implementation is done effectively. Next slide. Okay, so these are some key decisions that we made in Mississippi. Our initial focus, which I'm very glad to be joining you all today as you begin to kick off your implementation of your New Literacy Act, is our focus on building teacher and leader capacity. Next slide. And building this capacity is extremely important, again, because you have to have the buy-in for any of this to work. You have to have the buy-in of those who are going to be on the ground doing the work. So in 2013, when we passed our literacy law, this was the state of education in Mississippi. Of course, with quality counts, we were rated F in K-12 achievement, D for a chance for success for our students, 50th in the nation. And that just wasn't new in 2013, okay? We have been 50th in the nation for a long time. Graduation rate was significantly low. For our fourth graders on NAEP, they were one full grade level behind the national average. And there's a such thing called the honesty gap. This honesty gap where, we tell our students and our parents with our state assessment at that time that our students may have been scoring proficient. But when you look at the national data, it shows that our students were nowhere near proficient. So that's the honesty gap, making sure that what you're saying as far as your state and how well your state is doing with your state assessments and the rigor of those assessments is actually aligned to what our national assessment is saying and how well those students are performing. So we had to make some really bold changes and have some really courageous conversations as to how we would not just close the honesty gap, but also begin to narrow our achievement gap and our opportunity gaps for our students. Next slide. Okay, so we had an introduction before my presentation, just a little bit about the science of reading and those two models, Scarborough's rope, and I will touch a little bit on the simple view of reading in my next slide. But this is Nancy Young's ladder of reading, and this represents how many of our students really need this structured literacy approach that North Carolina has adopted and has committed to. And it shows that probably about 40% of our students are advantaged by a structured literacy approach, which means there may be 5% of those students who may be learning to read without difficulty. They may come to your pre-K or preschool programs or kindergarten, and they've already been exposed to some things, ways in which they have already been taught how to read. But about 60% of our students, it's essential for them to have this structured literacy approach for them to learn to read and to read proficiently. Next slide. So I wanted to include this slide in my presentation because I wanted to make sure that we reiterated that it's not just phonics. You know, you hear so many people talking about, you know, this phonics-based program or phonics-based science of reading, but it's not just phonics. It's everything that the National Reading Panel report has described as being essential to learning to read. It's all of those components that are represented here in just this word recognition times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. And I use this slide a lot, especially for my secondary teachers, to say to them, yes, we know that there are going to be some students who enter middle school, who enter high school even, who are struggling to read. And it's not beneficial to just say, sound it out. Okay, it's not beneficial to say, okay, well, I'm just going to skip you and I'm going to go to someone else. I want them to understand, and you'll want your teachers to understand, that it's not just phonics. You know, we have to engage with our students. We have to converse with our students, because language comprehension, the use of vocabulary, the background knowledge, the ways in which the teachers teach, you know, content, the structure of language, those things also matter as much as our word recognition and phonics and our phonological awareness. Those things together give us the product of reading comprehension. Okay, next slide. So these are our Literacy-Based Promotion Act strategies that we used, and my colleagues will go into more detail about how they deployed these specific strategies. But the components that we've included in our efforts include our educator training. To date, we've trained probably 16,000 of our educators, including our educator prep program professors in the science of reading. And we even opened up our training to pre-service students, because Mississippi has an assessment that our pre-service students must pass in the science of reading in order to be licensed. And most recently, Mississippi has invited all kindergarten through 12th grade teachers to attend our letter science of reading training. We also have coaching, our coaches who are in the building, supporting teachers on the ground, early identification, testing with intention, ensuring that once you receive those results from universal screeners, then there is a next step. There are actions that need to be taken to address those students, the challenges of those students who have been identified. Parent communication is going to be so key, because we have to be transparent with parents. I talked about the honesty gap for state assessment and national assessment, but guess what? There's also an honesty gap sometimes at the school level, where students are bringing home grades on report cards that may not be really reflective of their ability. And then when state tests occur and students aren't performing well on state tests, then parents are saying, well, I was thinking that my child was doing okay. So we have to make sure that we're honest with parents about their child's abilities and ways in which we will support the child at school, and ways in which parents can support their children at home. So parent communication is going to be key every step of the way. We also have individual reading plans. Parents are a part of that, making sure that those students are being progress monitored, and if interventions are not working for those students, that those interventions change. And the teachers are able to provide additional interventions, and then to progress monitor those for effectiveness as well. And then for us, we also have the retention component of our law, which, you know, a lot of people focus on, you know, well, so many children are going to be retained. And I say, well, once you screen students in September or August, you know at that moment which students are in danger of failing, which means that we have to put our focus on prevention and intervention. We can't give up on students, especially as soon as they come into the classroom. We cannot give up on students. And there are things that we know now from Dr. Moak's research, and of course, countless others, as ways in we can help remedy these challenges for our students. Next slide. So this is where we are. This is where we were in 2019, the most recent NAEP assessment. As you know, Mississippi was first in the nation for our gains in fourth grade reading and also fourth grade math. And that's one thing that was a very positive unintended consequence. And it's something that we now know. You know, when you address reading challenges, then it can really have a positive impact on a student's performance in the other content areas. Because you also have to read in math, you also have to read in science, you have to read in social studies. And those are the other courses wherein students are able to be exposed to a lot more informational text. So we've been able to see the fruits of our labor for that. I'm sure that's why we're here today. And we are just grateful to be able to share some strategies with you. So next slide. Okay, so the knowledge and power to enact change. I love when states pass laws. And I know we can't legislate everything, guys. I know that. But I look at these types of laws, honestly, as equity laws. You can go to the next slide. As equity laws. These things that are being done in our higher performing schools, that is just their daily activities. Some of these things are not being done in our lower performing schools, or for our schools that don't have the same amount of resources as other schools have. So with laws like this, you can actually say, we are going to ensure that all teachers are trained in the science of reading, not just those that are in districts that have money, right? We're going to make sure that all of our students are screened initially for early identification, not just those who can afford to purchase these screeners that are aligned to the science. So for strategies and next steps, I just have these here: early identification, diagnostic assessments, teacher training, instructional coaches or your case managers that you have, your consultants that you have in North Carolina, and then of course outreach to parents, and to discuss the impact of school attendance on reading proficiency. Okay, next slide. And I'll leave with this presentation by saying, be the change. You have to change the culture of your school. You are the leader. So we have to get buy-in with you first, right? That's why we're all here. Over 600 of you are here. Buy-in starts with the leader. Whether you're the district leader or the school leader, buy-in starts with you. So you have to change the culture, and you have to make sure that your teachers buy in and let your teachers know that the changes that are being made are those that are best for children. Okay, and then you have to change the perception. Change the perception of the partnership with your parents, or partnership with your stakeholders in your community, because you're going to need everyone in order to make this work. And then lastly, reject the blame game. You know, I was in a meeting one time with the university president and a K-12 school superintendent. And the president said, well, you're not sending us students who are prepared. A lot of your students from your K-12 system have to take remedial courses when they come to our university. So then the school district superintendent said, oh, well, your teachers aren't prepared when they exit your programs. So your teachers aren't effectively teaching our students. But at the end of the day, students are sitting in classrooms waiting on the adults to get it right. So that's what we have to do. We have to be the change in order to make those things happen. All right, next slide. And I think, yeah, this slide is just my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want to email me, or reach out to the North Carolina team, who definitely knows how to get in touch with me. And then next, I'm going to bring on my colleagues, Mississippi school leaders, and we're going to talk a little bit about lessons learned. So if you guys will join us via video, I will introduce you. Okay, so we have Dr. Tanika Hawkins-Lett, who is the principal of Hawkins Elementary in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We also have Brad Cox, who's the principal in West Clay, for West Clay Elementary School in West Point. And then we have Amy Hawkins, who is an MDE, or Mississippi Department of Education literacy coach, who is deployed to West Clay as one of her schools. So thank you so much for joining us. And next slide, please. Hi. Okay, so I'm going to ask the team some questions that we felt would be some good questions to start with as starting points. And I believe the Q&A is open if the audience has any questions, and if we have some time, we can get to some of those. So I will start with Dr. Lett. And I guess the first question I'll have for you and also for Mr. Cox is, what has been your experience with the transition to the science of reading instruction in your school? And with answering that question, just tell us a little bit about how long you've been a principal, and then you can respond to that question.
Okay. First of all, thank you all for having me. I am so honored to be able to speak to the great leaders of North Carolina. So I am I'm going into my second year as a principal. Just to give a little more background, I did teach for 10 years and I was a literacy coach for 4 years. And then I entered into principalship. And so just with the transition to the science of reading, the good thing is my first year here in Hattiesburg Public School District, well, back in Hattiesburg Public School District, the foundation was set here. Lots of trainings had already happened. The teachers were provided with resources and the district leaders were already kind of on board for implementation of the science of reading. And I think that is partly due to the fact that this was a literacy support school. And so they were accustomed to having the literacy support from Mississippi Department of Education. And so I came in to a good place. But I can speak to being a principal and coming into a good place. And I can also speak from a perspective of a literacy coach, because there are some times where, as I was coaching, the transition was not as easy. So I can just say that given the resources that were provided to me as a principal, our district has literacy supports. Again, we have the MDE literacy coaches, we have consultants in place, and the teachers who are bought in transition really well. I do have a pod of teachers that I'm working with to just help move them along. And so there is still a lot of work to be done. And so just basically, I'm still working through it, but the transition is not as difficult because of the support that I had coming in.
Right. Okay. So Brad, I believe you were already in your principalship when we began this effort, if I'm not mistaken. So just kind of talk a little bit about just kind of who you are, how long you've been an administrator, and what the transition was like for you.
Okay. I actually was a high school Algebra 1 teacher, and then was an assistant principal at 5th and 6th grade school, and for 3 years. And then I just finished my 4th year here at West Clay Elementary. And when I took over West Clay Elementary, my first year was also Miss Hawkins, my literacy coach. It was her first year. And so kind of coming from the high school world and then the middle school to being pre-K through 6th grade school. And, you know, my background being in math, it just, you know, it was very beneficial to me to have the literacy coach, just because, you know, my background was not in reading and not in phonics, and kind of one of the things that, you know, when I got here, that we wanted to get back to the basics. And I'll just give you a little background on my school. West Clay Elementary had received an F or a D rating for the 4 years prior to me arriving. And, you know, so when I got here, it was just kind of get back to the basics. And with math, that's math facts. And then with reading, you know, what I thought was just phonics, as Kymyona alluded to earlier, it is more than just phonics, but that was kind of my deal was, you know, let's get to the basics and let's do phonics. But I really didn't know much about what that meant or how to do it. And in those 4 years, just between the trainings and having the literacy coach and that thing, you know, I've learned a lot about it. But just because our staff, you know, the school ranking, the staff was kind of already expecting some change just with a new principal coming in. But then with the grade letter that the school had received, you know, they were open to suggestions and things like that, just because they wanted to improve. And I'll tell you, at the end of my second year, we were a B-rated school, and, you know, one teacher, we had a couple teachers that we moved to different classrooms or whatever, but basically we replaced one teacher. And so basically the same staff And just, with getting a little organization and then getting some trainings, we were able to make that move. So.
Yes, that is a fantastic story. And I'm sure that there are a lot of elementary principals or assistant principals who are on this webinar today who share a very similar background as you. They may not have had the training in reading or in elementary education, and now they are leaders of elementary schools. So it speaks to, as administrators, your willingness to say, okay, I want to learn more about this. And then, of course, again, this is where the rubber meets the road. You're the ones who are going to hold your teachers accountable for changing practice in such a positive way. And so, Amy, it's so good to see you. And so as a literacy coach coming into schools, West Clay is one of your schools, coming into schools and teachers not used to having a State Department person in their building. I think that was the first thing that teachers said, well, somebody from the State Department is going to be in my building. So how did you, not just address any resistance, but really kind of build relationships to let them know I'm not the one that's going to come in and audit, I'm really coming in to support you in changing your practice.
Yes, this job is just a great opportunity. I get to see so many different people and so many different teachers. And the one thing that was beautiful at the beginning of this job was that I had the opportunity to say to teachers, I am here for you. I am your voice. I am your help. I am your service. And once you build that rapport with your teachers, and that takes a little while. However, at West Clay, it didn't take long at all because Mr. Cox had fully bought in. He said, I need help with literacy. And so with his buy-in, the teachers were automatically comfortable with that buy-in, and that trust was set up almost instantly. And so the teachers, you just build a rapport with your teachers. You show them what you know and what you can do and what they can do, and walking alongside them in their classrooms, literally co-teaching and modeling and helping create anchor charts and looking at the data to see how we can change this instruction. What can we do to make this work for our students? What can we do to provide a win-win? And you have to start small. You have to start small. You can't just jump in and say, okay, we're going to do this all at once. And so it's happened in baby steps at West Clay. And this year they were limited support because their grades had increased and the students were performing. And in one grade, we didn't even have any IRPs because of the consistency and the routine and everything that we saw that we had started the first year we were there. It continued. And so that was just a beautiful thing. Mr. Cox was so excited because we looked at our teachers and we said, you implemented these practices, these best practices, and now you're getting to see the fruits of your labor. And so it's been fun to do this.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know, I think Tanika spoke to limited support or support schools. And I'll just take this moment to say in Mississippi, our schools are identified for support based on an average of 2 years of third grade reading data, state assessment data. And we put our literacy coaches in some of our lowest performing schools, but we have to have what's called gradual release. Principals hate it, right? We say, oh my God, you're doing so great. You have some consistent gains. So we have to kind of move along and let you lead and sustain, and we go to other schools. But yeah, so limited support, although we see it as a great thing, and of course the State Department sees it as a great thing, but principals are just so, supportive, and they really enjoy having their literacy coach there to support their teachers. So couple of questions first, and then we'll answer the last two. How many students are in your school? There's a question about that. So Brad, how many students are at West Clay, and Tanika, how many at Hawkins?
Go ahead, Dr. Hawkins-Lett.
At Hawkins, we have about 348 students.
K-5?
K-5, pre-K,
Okay.
5.
Pre-K-5, okay.
And West Clay, we have about 140 students. We're a little bit less now just because of COVID and that kind of stuff, some people doing homeschooling and things like that. So,
yeah. Okay, all right. So then the next question is, how do you structure leadership team planning time? Sometimes what are your content and your consistency of meetings? Like, how often do you have these meetings? Possibly, are they on the calendar? I know that we've had questions, not questions, but guidance about PLCs. And is that how you structure your leadership team meetings? So who's on your leadership team and how do you structure those meetings? And I'll start with Dr. Hawkins-Lett.
Okay, so our leadership teams are structured throughout the year. We meet weekly, but that planning starts in the summer. And actually we're getting ready to plan for how we're going to move forward through the year, because our meetings are very data driven and targeted when we do meet during the school year. But weekly we meet our teachers meet for PLCs, 3 times a week, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays of every week. Leadership meetings are every Monday at 9 a.m. And we kind of plan what our week will look like. And again, like I said, our meetings are very targeted and data driven. So we try to go in and observe exactly what the needs are. And so basically, when we meet, we discuss what we're going to observe, what deficits we've seen. We talk about our NTSS process, all of those students who, need the individual reading plans and things of that nature. We discuss all of those things in the leadership meetings, and each person on my leadership team, and I'll say that I have my academic interventionist on my leadership team, my counselor, my assistant principal, and I also have the librarian on my leadership team because she runs interventions. And so each one of them have their areas that they have to deploy out and see after and monitor. And so every week we discuss those items, and then they deploy out and do their observations. And then on Monday, we'll debrief about what we saw and then go into what we're going to do for the upcoming week, and then we continue on. So it's every week, and it's like clockwork. And yes, it is on a calendar, because I have to remind myself every Monday to meet with my leadership team.
And it's kind of hard kind of thinking about it after this school year, just because it's been so different, and meetings have had to be a lot different. But when I first took over and we first started implementing some of this stuff, we met more often. There were even some days where we tried to basically try to create more time for our teachers, because teachers are pulled so many different ways, and we try to create some more time. So whether that meant using teachers' assistants or some subs or whatever, and kind of creating, instead of their usual, we have 50-minute planning times. Instead of that, trying to make that be 2 hours, or even one time we did, or a couple different times we kind of blocked off half a day for them to kind of plan and kind of get together in their PLCs and do that kind of stuff. And so at the beginning, the meetings were a little more often, but we also tried to, keep the teachers in mind and create that little extra time for them, just because, as a teacher, your time is limited. But then kind of, as we kind of got into the groove, our teachers they have a common planning time, and we try to do as much as we could during that time. But during those meetings, it was all about the students, and we use STAR from Renaissance as a progress monitor. We use Case 21 as a common assessment, and so we're looking at individual students and where they are and where we want them to be, and if we're doing interventions with them, is that working? Is it not working? And just as much time as we can, just looking at specific students and what's working and what's not working.
Okay, so before we get to this last question, there was another question in the Q&A about resistance again. So, we've painted this picture, hey, we've had our teachers, our students, everyone's on board. Yeah, but not really all the time, right? So when you've had those teachers, even APs maybe, or other staff in your building who were just resistant to change. I'll start with Amy. What do you do when you say, you build rapport, what's an example of a teacher who has just kind of said, hey, I know you're here to do your job, but I don't think I need you? How do you respond to that?
Thank you, Dr. Burke. That's where you start having some courageous conversations, and you come in and you offer to model, to show. And I just always ask my teachers, would you mind if I did this for you today? Would you let me do this? And just have them kind of sit back and observe, and maybe take notes of things that they liked and didn't like about the model lesson. And yes, resistance has come from some veteran teachers that have been there for a while, and it's been, what they've been doing has been working for them. And so we look at the data and we say, how can we help target this student's needs? What can we do differently? And usually, as I said before, you try one thing. And once you show the teacher that this one thing, all we had to do was change one thing for this one student. And even if you model in a small group at the teacher-led table, or if you model with the whole class, the one thing, and you're going to get that from your data, that student needs. And you're going to see that if that teacher can see, yes, that one thing worked, now I want to walk alongside you and let's practice that one thing and make it better, because it's going to affect more than that one child.
Thank you. Okay, Brad.
Yeah, and I'll say this, what a couple of advantages I had. One is us being a smaller school, and two, the fact that we had that F&D rating for several years. So those were to my advantage with the resistance, but you still have people who don't want to change. And so being structured helped us a lot from the very beginning. And Miss Amy Hawkins had to help you with this part, but we had some non-negotiables from the very beginning. Here's 3 or 4 things that we have to see. And so we gave them that up front, and we made sure, that was rolling. And then we implemented just the first 90 minutes of our day from 8 to 9:30. This is our literacy block. This is when we're teaching reading. And, and then, as that kind of progressed, we moved into Hegarty phonics, and I need to see this, and this kind of needs to be the first thing of the day. And then just being visible, just kind of walking in and out of classrooms. And I swear I got so tired of the Hegarty phonics when the teacher in there doing baseball, and then, you sit in there for 5 minutes and you go into the next classroom and it's the same thing. And then you open the door next, and I'm tired of hearing this stuff, but it was every day and it was repetitive. And so the structure helped us a lot with, getting started and getting the ball rolling. And then after that, when we kind of met resistance, and you knew some people were kind of struggling, and then just Miss Hawkins was great about, you go in the classroom and it's, what do you need help with? What do you feel like you could change with? And then, well, let me model that for you or whatever. And so, there are times where you have to have some tough conversations, but, having that structure and then just approaching people the right way kind of, headed a lot of that off, so that it really wasn't as much resistance. Now, what was being said in the parking lot, behind my back, I don't know. But as far as just the tough conversations, they were few and far between. And I felt like just because of the structure and then just the communication with the teachers the whole time kind of stopped some of that. So.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, Tanika. So you had, like you said, you've been in a couple of roles, right? So you've been the coach coming into the schools. Especially when we were first getting started with this early, and then now leading your schools. So, and then Brad also answered how he was holding teachers accountable, being visible, letting them know that you care, not just saying, you can handle that and I'll be in my office, but really holding them accountable for that. So talk to us a little bit about just resistance that you've probably seen and how you've held your teachers and staff accountable.
Okay, so I will say that the resistance is a little bit different from coaching to being a principal. So because I'm the principal, some of that resistance it just looks a little bit different. But I noticed and I found that the resistance came from teachers not knowing. They just didn't know and understand what the science of reading was, and they also did not understand the importance of it. And so the way I worked through that was through training and support. And a lot of times, I heard everybody talking about modeling and things of that nature. That's what I did. I went in, I made sure that the teachers who didn't know and understand were trained and supported. Again, like I said, we have the MDE literacy coaches as well as the district coaches. So I would assign those individuals to specific teachers. And then we also did a lot of peer observations, and there were lots of opportunities for me to model and co-teach. And co-teaching is just me observing and seeing something going wrong, and I just jump in and grab the material and start. So once I made the teachers comfortable, I think that's the part of the building the relationship. And I think that came from just coaching. So building the relationships with the teachers and then helping them to understand the importance of the science of reading is what helped to address that resistance. Because and there's still some people who are not totally bought into it. I'm still working through that, but the support is the biggest thing. And then, of course, holding teachers accountable. I plan it. I schedule it. I created a daily learning agenda, because whatever I wanted implemented is on that daily learning agenda, so that I can effectively monitor that, and my leadership team can effectively monitor that with me. So I have that daily learning agenda. The teachers know exactly what I expect, and then I can go in and observe and see what I'm looking for and see where the deficits are in the teacher, and see what supports they need. And so basically, that's how I hold them accountable. They know I'm coming in. Those observations are frequent with the leadership team, and we work through it that way. And I've seen some success with that, with the implementation.
Thank you. Okay, I want to turn it over to DPI, but I do know that we have several questions, and I'm not sure where we are on time. There have been a couple of requests. If there is a video of any of the PLC meetings that have taken place at your schools, and then also what kind of supports may be in place for upper elementary students, such as your 4th and 5th grade students. So if there is someone from DPI who can kind of chime in to let me know where we are on time, or if you can give us the transcript of these questions and I can have the Mississippi team respond to those questions and send you some things by the beginning of next week, we can do that as well. So just let me know how you want us to handle these additional.
Dr. Burke, this is Kelly. You have time. We have slated for questions until 2:10. So there's time to address questions. So y'all are doing great on time. So keep rolling.
Fantastic. Okay, so what kind of supports are in place for your upper elementary, your teachers and students? You know, we've had, we started out with our initiative Mississippi is K3. I know in 2019, right before I left the department, we began to support K4 teachers. And then I know, again, training has been extended to K12. But as far as boots on the ground supports, how are you supporting 4th and 5th grade? Let's start with, Dr. Hawkins.
Okay, so I actually have hired in some additional tutors for 4th and 5th grade. They're actually certified, but they're retired. So they go in and they pull and they do interventions. Next year, our district has allowed for 2 additional staffing slots, and so they will all have assistants next year as well, just to kind of help to bridge the gap. So the 4th and 5th grade students are pooled just like all of the other K3 students. They're pooled into small groups. The teachers are doing small group in 4th and 5th grade, and they have the additional tutors, and then they'll have the TAs next year. So that is how we support our 4th and 5th grade students.
Okay, Brad or Amy for West Clay?
Well, we do not have a lot of extra hands on deck, and when it comes to 4th and 5th grade, but our 4th and 5th grade teachers, also attended our letters training and our phonics first training and that kind of stuff. And our goal the whole time is kind of being by the time they leave 3rd grade, we want everybody on grade level, and so we are kind of pouring into that. But to be honest, and especially after the COVID year, kids are going to slip through the cracks, or kids move in that you didn't have your hands on every year and that kind of stuff. And so it happens. And just like, our pre-K through 3rd grade have that 90-minute literacy block, so does 4th and 5th grade. And during that time, it's not interrupted. We're not doing any kind of pullouts. We're not doing inclusion or specials or whatever. And so none of that happens. But then what we try to do is what we call our power hour. I know a lot of schools do it and they have their own name, but so we have our set time where our gifted kids get pulled out and our inclusion kids get pulled out. And that's when we're doing interventions and that kind of thing. And so during that hour where no new instruction has happened, then we do pull a teacher's assistant to try to get there. And then we have the small groups and we're kind of able to meet our students where they are, because, some student in 4th grade is going to need some help with phonics or prefixes and suffixes or whatever it is. And so, being able to kind of break them into smaller groups and have an extra body and kind of do things like that. So.
Okay, great. There is a question for Dr. Hawkins-Lett. What do you all do with the data after the guidance counselor, coordinator, other members of the team conduct observations? Is that instant feedback to the teachers afterwards?
Yes, so we have Feedback Friday, every Friday, and they have a 10-minute rotation schedule, so they'll know when to come in every Friday. And so we share the data with the teachers, and then we ask them what supports do they think they need. And of course, we make our recommendations for the support. And then at that point, I'll decide whether to do a peer observation, assign a district literacy coordinator to that specific teacher, or whatever needs to happens. But every Friday that we do have Feedback Friday. And so that's how we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So someone asked a question, I guess, Amy, I'll let you answer this. I guess, how will this go or mesh with other phonics programs that they may have? And I don't know whether they're wondering if this is about the professional development or letters. If not, I guess they can correct me in the chat. But Amy, I want you to just talk a little bit about how, letters is not a program, in any program that they're doing. Letters helps the teachers with their knowledge base to, just effectively implement whatever program that they've adopted. So I know we had some districts initially was like, well, we don't want our teachers to go to letters because we've already adopted something, we just had to really explain to them what the professional development piece was, as opposed to, or how you can actually use that in conjunction with any program or any curricula that they adopt. Just help the teacher.
Yes, the language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling was a very beneficial thing for all of my schools. I've had several schools that I've been assigned to in the state, and that was one of my very strong suggestions to my principals, is that the letters training is very beneficial. It does not have to be it's almost a methodology of using any program. You can implement the letters. There's like a 7-step thing that we do through letters that our teachers do, and you can use this with any program. It's just really, it's a process that you go through when you're teaching your children to read, your students to read. And all of my teachers at all of my schools have had the letters training. And one of the great things about it is that at each one of my schools, they all have different phonics programs. And so the beauty of this is just showing them how to implement the methods and the process with the program that they have, and utilizing that and utilizing the resources that they have, and showing them that, this is about making that connection in the brain. It doesn't matter what program you have, you're making that connection to the visual, to the pronunciation, to the comprehension. And so that Mr. Cox jumped right on board, and he said, what do we have to do? How do we get our teachers in here? And so we signed up for that professional development through our RESA programs, opportunities in Mississippi. And that has been wonderful. Like, our teachers can't get enough of, and they ask. I had a couple of teachers last year at West Clay that didn't get to do it the year before. And so they were like, how do I do that this year? This is this was a great year to implement and, kind of fill their teacher toolboxes. And once they saw other teachers using it and how easy it was, even with the program that they had, they were like, I want to know how to do that. I want to know those techniques and strategies.
Yeah, and Mississippi's new literacy director, Kristen Wynn, has been an amazing leader. And during the pandemic, literacy coaches participated in and facilitated really what's called Literacy Live. So there was always professional development. You all had some really great guests for your Literacy Live session. So in addition to Veterans Professional Development, the coaches put on amazing professional development opportunities via online, virtually for teachers here in Mississippi. Of course, there has been a few requests to see that daily learning agenda. And then also there's a question about the literacy blocks. And I know, Brad, you mentioned initially, that your literacy blocks are 90 minutes. And that was the question, how long are they? And you also mentioned that they were uninterrupted, but there's a question about, does it vary by grade level, or are you just consistent in that 90-minute block of time for the building? So I'll let Brad answer first and then Tanika.
Yeah, I mean, we are consistent through the whole building. With that being now, our 5th and 6th grade students, they have team teachers. And so, if they're starting with math, obviously they're not, doing that literacy block to start the school day, but they are once they come. But, pre-K through 3rd, it is set. And so our older ones do have it. It just looks a little different just based on their schedule and whether they start their day with their math teacher.
Okay, great. Tanika?
Okay, so in a typical year, our K1 students are on a 120-minute block. 2nd and 3rd are on a 90-minute block. And then 4th and 5th, because they change classes, they have 75 minutes. So it is by grade level. But this year, we got out of school an hour and a half early each day. So that made a huge difference, but we were still able to maintain the 90-minute block for kindergarten through 1st grade. And then 2nd and 3rd had about 75 minutes. So we were it was a tough year this year trying to get all of the 90 minutes in with that shortened time. But next year, we're 100% in person, and so we'll be back on track.
All righty. I was trying to see if there are any other questions. Okay. What time of the year do you start with your tutors or small groups? At the beginning of the year, you're collecting all this data on your students. So when do you bring the tutors in?
We get our tutors as soon as they are released, because most of them are paid through federal funds. And so as soon as they get all of that, but typically they start in September, and we start rolling out then, because usually, even if we don't have the data or we haven't desegregated the data, we have end of the year data that we can look at. And so we'll group then, and then we'll change, because our groups change throughout the year as we get new progress monitoring data and the universal screeners and all of that. So we start immediately. As soon as the federal programs department gives us our money, we have them.
Yeah, we start the 2nd week of school. So as soon as, you know, with basically the first week is let's get everybody in the routine and get in the groove. And then the second week we hit the ground running, and just because of that summer lull sometimes, you know, so we're just, you know, hitting the basics and getting everybody's, you know, brain going again. And so the second week of school when we started, it may not be just super specific for each child, but we do go ahead and start. And then as the year goes on, we try to take that progress monitoring assessment, you know, that first or second week of school. And so as soon as we can get more detailed and individualized for each student, we do that. But yeah, we start right away.
Yeah, and thank you all. I appreciate you all for mentioning there is end of the year data that can be used as you are awaiting the upcoming school year, that should be used and looked at to say, okay, this is how we're going to approach it. These students have already been flagged or identified. K2 here, we do not have a state assessment, of course, for K2. Uniquely, Louisiana is looking at doing that for their kindergarten through second grade teachers as part of their new law, and for it to be included in accountability. So that'll be one of the first states that will be looking at state assessments for K2, but Mississippi doesn't have that. We do have our universal screeners 3 times per year. And even with your third grade, your fourth, fifth grade students at the end of the year, that end of year state assessment data that you'll have as they are entering the upcoming year. Someone did ask about which universal screeners do we use. For Mississippi, there's a list of universal screeners, and that's it on the MDE website. There are 6 currently, I believe still, Amy, that are on that list from which our school districts, our school leaders can choose. Most use the top 3, the big 3, NWEA, MAP, iReady, and STAR Early Literacy. So normally our schools will pick from one of those. And I think someone asked about, as you begin, we'll make this our last question, as you begin implementation, what were some early data, whether it's qualitative and or quantitative points that indicated that implementation was actually being successful and making a difference before your state assessment? So how did you already know before the state assessment, oh, wow, I know I still have these 3, you know, who may not meet the mark. So what were you using? I guess things such as the individual reading plan, the progress monitoring, and any other data you may have had. And I guess, Dr. Lett, we'll start with you.
Okay, so again, with this past year being my first year, it was really hard for me to even have any data. I had the 2018, 2019 data, but then I had the end of the year iReady data from, and I'm hoping this answers your question. I looked at that end of the year iReady data because uniquely, my school was one of the schools that actually got to complete it. They finished their EOY before spring break, and they never came back. So I did have that, and I held on to it. That's what I used to plan and to move forward to see what the needs were. And so yeah, that end of the year data was very beneficial for me.
Okay, Brad, and then Amy.
Well, at West Clay, you know, we use the STAR, the Renaissance, and then we have common assessments, you know, basically we call them our practice state tests that are done by Case 21. And so we were able to use that data. But just as far as, you know, whether that data showed that what was working early, not necessarily. And I talked a lot about in our faculty meetings and whatever, that we weren't looking for a silver bullet. We're not looking for this magic trick that's gonna turn us, you know, change the school overnight. You know, we were wanting to do things the right way, and knowing that changing it was going to take time and wasn't necessarily going to happen in that first year, but then in that second year and third year. And so each year it's gotten a little better, and our teachers see that, well, you know, I know that the kindergarten teacher that they had last year was doing this because when I started it, you know, I could tell the students had already been through this routine and they already knew this. And so, you know, did we use that data? Yeah, but in the first year, at the end of the first year, we were still a D. And so nothing changed. But then at the end of that second year, we became a B school. And, you know, it like I said, we weren't looking for something that was going to change it right away, because there wasn't. If there was something, it would have already, you know, been taking place, everybody would be doing it, you know? So we knew that this was going to take years, and that was kind of our goal from the very beginning. And so, you know, it was small wins and little habits, and the teachers know their kids, and just seeing, well, you know, that we're seeing a little improvement here and a little improvement here, and it may not show up right away, but it's going to show up next year, and it's going to show up the next year, and that gap that they had between where they were and where they're supposed to be is starting to close. And so we were seeing those gaps kind of close. And so, you know, you got to bring that kind of stuff up, because it may not show up on your common assessment that this is happening. So you kind of got to, you know, you got to make sure you point that out in a faculty meeting, and you got to make sure they get the praise and that kind of stuff, just so that to keep everybody moving, because at first, you know, it's not going to show up right away. And so go ahead, Ms. Hawkins.
That's a great point. One of the things that we as literacy coaches have the opportunity to do is to have data meetings once a month. At West Clay, that's how Mr. Cox chose to have it, was once a month. And we look at the data of each student based on the previous screener that we have used, whether that be the end of the year or middle of the year or beginning of year. And so having that data and creating those individualized reading plans, should that be the case, you're constantly aware that this student needs extra supports. And so you're providing those supports, you're progress monitoring, you're doing the interventions. And the one thing that is a great thing that we've also done at West Clay is used a diagnostic after the screener, just to get a more pinpointed idea of where that student's deficit is. And so having that information has helped us, as Mr. Cox said, keeping the routine. You can tell a child that has been through a phonological awareness program in kindergarten, because when they get to first grade, they're still doing that. They have those routines in place. And so just having that data is so important. Those data meetings are so important. And sometimes, you know, your teachers are like, but I just don't see that. Well, those instructional reports from all of those screeners are so beneficial also for our teachers. It's great feedback to say, oh, wait, I might need to reteach that, or I might need to do this a different way. And so that's one thing. I love the data meetings, just because it does give such pinpointed feedback. And one thing that Mr. Cox and I talked about, you know, that one student, perhaps they didn't pass the third grade reading gate. Well, perhaps that student just needed to answer only 2 more questions correctly. And so how can we provide the basis for helping that student just answer just 2 more questions and they pass? So it's just a matter of breaking it down and starting very minimal and simple basics.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. My former staff members, I am just so excited and just excited for you to join me here. And thank you again, Mr. Cox, for sharing your expertise. And I think now we're going to be turning it over to Casey Taylor from North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Kymyona, and we appreciate our panelists, all of you, for sharing your experiences and all that you've learned from your experience implementing the science of reading in Mississippi. North Carolina has begun an exciting journey of professional learning, and we know that school leadership and literacy leadership matter significantly. School leaders directly impact student achievement, and the impact of school leaders on student learning is second only to teachers. Their research has shown that to be the case. School leaders have the opportunity to promote equitable outcomes and play a critical role in supporting the literacy needs of all students, including those who are at risk. You build, as school leaders, you build strong literacy teams, and you have the ability to improve teaching and learning by promoting staff motivation, by commitment, and a positive school culture. And You are instructional leaders who set the tone and support implementation for evidence-based literacy practices, not only by providing access to high-quality professional development, but also by supporting the process with coaching and feedback opportunities. And we've heard a little bit about what that's looked like in Mississippi today, but I'm also excited to hear and see the stories that will evolve over the next few years as we undertake this professional learning across our state. And then we have others who've already begun it and are implementing things aligned to the science of reading, some who have already ventured into letters, and so stories are already emerging. But we're on the precipice of exciting things in North Carolina with our literacy efforts. And Amy alluded earlier to the great effort that so many partners and collaborative people have undertaken to see this advance. And so we appreciate you joining us today and being open to learning from colleagues across Mississippi. And then we want to share with you today some resources that we feel will be beneficial to you as you move forward and as you lead your instructional teams. Next slide. So the Lead for Literacy website includes a variety of different resources, some of which are literacy leadership briefs, as well as infographics. So we're going to highlight 3 of those today. One is the Lead for Literacy framework. Another is the Literacy Leadership, What Do You Need to Know, brief and infographic. And finally, the Literacy Leadership, What Do You Need to Do, brief and infographic. So the framework, the literacy framework can be a help to school and district leaders, and it can help you navigate the process of evaluating, of building, implementing, and sustaining evidence-based practices within a comprehensive school-wide reading model. So I want to talk just briefly about these 5 things that are listed here. Effective leaders have the opportunity to make reading a school-wide priority. Casting a clear vision and a mission for reading to ensure that all teachers are guided by common goals and that there's that shared vision for high quality reading instruction. That sets the tone for what is to come. Focusing on continuous improvement work strategically through working with staff and teams to improve reading instruction and intervention within a multi-tiered system of support is another key element. And then supporting high quality reading instruction and intervention. Effective leaders also guide teams in purposeful use of data to inform reading instruction in meaningful and actionable ways. And I saw a lot of questions and people seeking more information about how data is used. And that's going to be the driver, a key driver in implementation success, both for the determination of where the needs are to identify and highlight in the beginning, but then also as you progress, that data is going to be critical to showing how you can evaluate to determine the effectiveness of what you're doing. And then effective leaders utilize job-embedded learning formats, using that to develop and maintain educator expertise. And then I'd like to now hand it over to Kelly Bentime, one of my colleagues, and she's going to talk with you further about what more school leaders need to know and what you need to do to be successful with the implementation that you'll lead on your campuses.
Thank you, Casey. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to dig in a little bit deeper to the 2 briefs that have to do with what do you need to know and what do you need to do. When you think about what do you need to know, we want to think about what are those priority reading skills that we know that students need. How do we support teachers with implementing evidence-based literacy practices in their classrooms? And then how do we evaluate, prioritize, plan, and implement an effective reading model? All of these are really important questions and points to kind of think about as you begin to think about what you as an administrator needs to know, and then what do your staff teachers need to know as well. Before I continue on, I want to point out, I know that NCPAPA is sharing with you a PDF of this presentation from today, and anywhere that you see here at the bottom, those are links that you'll be able to click on within the PDF to go directly to the documents referenced on that slide, and the actual documents themselves are links as well. So I encourage you to use this PDF as a resource when you kind of get back and take a look at the recording again, maybe, and absorb it a little bit deeper. So you heard mentioned earlier by Mary, what do you need to know, these priority skills? And you'll see here on the brief that they also bring up Scarborough's reading rope. The reading rope is really important because what it does is it highlights for us not just those major skills, but the sub skills that are going to be really important that our students have in order to become skilled readers. Moving on and thinking about how are we going to support our teachers with implementing evidence-based literacy practices. Across the state, we're really fortunate right now with letters that's going to be able to help us provide that support for our administrators and our teachers. But what we also know that workshops, coaching, and professional development are great levers, but we also know that we have to offer support. So once those teachers are back in their buildings, they'll have bridge to practice opportunities through letters, but what are we going to do to support them through professional learning communities where they can talk about what's going really well, what are they struggling with, what is their new learning, and what does this look like? What are these evidence-based literacy practices looking like in their own schools and classrooms across the building? And I also want to think about in supporting teachers, I want to reference back to Dr. Hawkins-Lett, where she was talking about, she's put in a lot of really clear and consistent structures in her school building to support her teachers. They know that they're going to get feedback frequently weekly on Fridays. They know that a team is going to be meeting weekly to help support them and think about how they can grow as they kind of learn around the science of reading. And so those clear and consistent procedures are really important for our teachers because they work as supports for them when they're trying to implement these literacy-based practices. Thinking again too, and how do we continue to support? Another document I want to share with you, and this will be linked here when you get the PDF, is the EAB Science of Reading Implementation Guide. And some of their data tells us that for 50% of administrators, it's challenging to provide content-specific guidance for teachers because there are lots of different content areas that you're supporting within your school buildings and in your districts. That's what's wonderful about letters is providing that content-specific guidance is going to be there for you. But what this information also tells us is that we have teachers spending over 150 hours trying to create and source their own material for literacy. I know we heard earlier from the principals and they mentioned some things around some of their curriculums, but high quality instructional materials are important. I also included a link here to the Mississippi Department of Education page that talks directly about high quality instructional materials. And they also have some really great links and resources there for how do you choose and discern and make best choices and are good consumers of the curriculums that are out there. So we know that as our teachers go through letters, they're going to be learning content knowledge and they're going to begin to understand and ask questions around, well, wait a minute, what about this curriculum? Does this have all the pieces and components that I know that I need for my students to be successful in my classroom? And so what we want to make sure is that we are thinking about what are the high quality instructional materials that we are using to support students and that we're using in our buildings to support teachers so they aren't spending 162 hours on average a year trying to find and create their own materials. And we also know that when it comes to the science of reading, it is about word recognition, which is the phonics piece, but it's also about language comprehension. And so when we think about the word recognition piece, it's really important that teachers have a strong phonics scope and sequence to follow when they're trying to really get those students decoding those words early on. So here's a quote I'd like for you just to take a look at. This actually comes from the principal's primer for raising reading achievement, which is part of the administrator piece for letters. And I just encourage us to think about as we're working with teachers, yes, their knowledge is having to shift. Yes, there are going to be some shifts in practice, but it's also going to have to require a shift in philosophy and attitude. So what are we doing to help support our teachers and making this shift and kind of coming alongside of them and not playing, as I know Dr. Burk mentioned earlier, the blame game? What are we doing to walk alongside our teachers to support them in these transitions? So let's think about too, with what do you need to know? How are you going to prioritize and plan an effective model? So when we're thinking about our models, we really want to dig in deeper, and we want to make sure we have a consistent model where we are prioritizing, we're planning, we're implementing, and we're evaluating. But we want to make sure that we don't stop at implementation. Implementation is where we often get stuck. So we prioritize for literacy, we make great plans, and then we implement them, but then we don't ever evaluate them. Or how are we using our data, and what data are we using to evaluate our implementation? And without that implementation piece being evaluated, then we can become stagnant and we can continue practices that our data is showing us is not working. So it's really important to make that sure that you are evaluating, and then once you evaluate, you might have to reprioritize. I liked what the principal said earlier about this is a long journey. We know this isn't going to be a shift that occurs right away, where you're immediately going to see these instant changes and shifts in not only practice, but in data outcomes. And so this is going to be a journey, and we want to make sure as part of that journey, we are consistently working in a continuous improvement cycle. So what do we need to do as literacy leaders? We need to be able to recognize the features of effective instructional delivery. We need to make evidence-based literacy instruction a school-wide priority. That was one of the common pieces I heard from our principals here today. They made literacy instruction a priority, even with one principal, Dr. Hawkins-Lett, sharing that they were having to end school an hour and a half early. They still made it work. Literacy was still a priority. It might have had less time, but it was still a priority in their school day. And we want to make sure, how are we thinking about collecting information and providing feedback on the content and delivery of literacy instruction? And I think you heard some great examples of that today. The resources I've shared with you, the EAB resource, along with these Lead for Literacy briefs and that site, are two great places that you can go to really dig in deep and learn a little bit more about what classroom walkthroughs can look like, what's working in your school, what's not working. One other piece I think that's particularly powerful in the EAB piece that was shared, and you'll get here in a minute with our resources, is people often wonder, how am I going to handle resistance? And they have some really great points in there where they have claims and areas of resistance that you might hear. And then what is a response to those areas of resistance? What does the research tell us? And what do we know about evidence-based practices? That becomes a good response to those areas of resistance you might be feeling. And I just want to finally end, and I know we've talked about having a clear vision and mission for literacy achievement, but I encourage you all to think about, what are your core values around literacy for your school? What do you believe about how children learn to read, and what are best practices for serving all students in your school when it comes to reading instruction? And those core values around literacy can kind of become that anchor that ground your school and what your beliefs are around literacy. So that way, when you begin to make decisions around high quality instructional materials, evidence-based practices, you can lean back on that anchor of those core values in your belief systems to help guide those decision-making processes around literacy. So again, that was a fast run through. Again, this is just an overhead, a big bird's eye view of the work, but I encourage you to dig into these resources. When you click on the PDF, I encourage you to click on the links and take some time digging in. I'm going to hand it back over to Casey, and she's going to share a little bit more explicitly about the resources I've mentioned.
Yes, we have linked for you some resources on the final slide in this presentation, or actually I think it's now the second to last slide, but we've covered some of the items in the Lead for Literacy piece, but there are certainly many more resources on their website that you would benefit from spending some time in. And then a Science of Reading implementation guide that Kelly mentioned from EAB has been linked, and that has some really explicit guidance throughout an implementation process. It has some great questions that goes back to that coaching and feedback piece that Kelly just talked about. And then the roadmap for implementing evidence-based practices is by the REL Southeast. And that is also a wonderful resource to let you do a walkthrough and self-evaluation of where you are as a school or as a district and determine what you're ready for and what your next steps might be. And then finally, or second to last, the science of reading, a defining movement. This is a coalition of people collaborating across many different professions, but in one effort of really defining the science of reading, reducing misconceptions, and promoting proper use of practices that are aligned to the science. And so if you're looking for some clarification around the use of that term, and then what is it, how is it defined, what does it mean, there's going to be some more resources there, and that's a growing movement and coalition, and so they are continuing to share new resources as they progress. And then finally, we've shared an animated video titled Learning to Read, and this outlines the process of learning to read, and it was developed by one of our colleagues, Angela Preston. So we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're overwhelmed at the response and the interest that was here for this session. We thank you. You have our deep gratitude for participating. And we also want to once again thank our guests, Dr. Kymyona Burk, Ms. Hawkins, Dr. Hawkins-Lett, and Mr. Cox. And we also want to thank NCPAPA for their partnership and for making this opportunity possible. And at this time, I'm going to turn the session back over to our NCPAPA colleagues, Dr. Shirley Prince.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to the Mississippi team. That was excellent information. Thank you to the DPI team for such a well-structured session. And especially thank you to our participants who took the time to help themselves be better leaders, especially in making this very important initiative work. We have a survey that Tracy Story will be putting in the chat box for you. Please give us feedback. We want to have your feedback because we're having 2 follow-up sessions, and we'd like to know what you would like to see in the follow-up sessions, if there's anything that we could do differently. Or so we always welcome your feedback. So our 2 follow-up sessions are going to be July 13 will be one, and then July 28th. So we'll be sending out more information about that. So again, thank you, everyone. I hope this was helpful for you. And don't forget the survey. And thank you so much and have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye now.